Let me share my screen. All right, well, everybody, welcome to the March 2021 meetup of the Nashville Modern Excel and Power BI User Group. As for those who have been around for a few minutes, you've heard that we have a wonderful presentation today. It's going to be a lot of fun, as you can tell already. A lot of fun, nerdy, geeky things. So I'm looking forward to it. By the way, Will, if I could just ask you to go ahead and record, if I'm not doing so already, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see. So the agenda for today is, well, it is the lunch hour, so feel free to grab some lunch. Take your camera off and put yourself on mute if you're going to do that. But do feel free to grab some lunch. We have some announcements and some what's new, and so we actually have quite a few things to cover today. So we'll go through them fairly quickly so that we can leave as much time as possible for Matthew, who's got really a unique but a really wonderful presentation coming up. And then while Matthew has to leave at 1, we'll try to stick around for as long as anyone wants to stick around. So, all right, let's get into the announcements. So first of all, we did talk about this a little while back. So there is the Gartner Data and Analytics Summit. So there aren't a whole lot of conferences, either virtual or in person, that are going on. Lately, particularly with with PASS going away, unfortunately. So there's not any SQL Saturdays, it's not PASS Summit. But Gartner Analytics Summit is coming up. It's going to be virtual, and that is going to be May 4th through the 6th of this year. So check that out. There's also going to be a virtual, this is a training that is led by Microsoft employees in data modeling and shaping. It's going to be led by Jay Hurt, Yana Perkovich, and Alex Powers. Alex is actually going to be presenting with us, I believe, next month on query folding, if I remember correctly. So that should be a really great presentation as well. So so you can go to that link there, that short link that I've got for you on the right. That's going to be March 24th and 25th from 1 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, or so 3 to 7 p.m. our time. Also, we're going to send out both this presentation, and Matthew had allowed for us to send out his deck as well. So we'll send both of those out this afternoon sometime. And so, if you want to click on, so that way you can click on the link, you don't have to write these down. So you can find all the links that we have in here by getting them that way. So also want to call out some updates for the user group. So we're up to 1,343 members. That's an increase of about 200, I think, in the last 3 months, roughly. So we're growing by leaps and bounds, which is really wonderful. I'm pretty thrilled about that. We had, I think, I don't want to say something like 60, 70 new users who signed up just within the last few weeks. So Matthew, that's a lot to do with how many people want to come hear what you have to talk about. I think a lot of people, we have a lot of new people coming to the user group who have found us, through that exposure. So, we're growing rapidly. We're really excited about that. We do have a YouTube channel. So this presentation is being recorded and will be put on that YouTube channel as soon as possible, hopefully this afternoon, but as soon as we can get that up there. So we also have a new LinkedIn group as well. So again, you can go to that URL on the screen there. So so Nashville Power BI LinkedIn, or you can just go to LinkedIn and search. You can go to the group section. You can search for the Nashville Power BI User Group, and you can find it. You can find it that way. So I post on there several times a week, and so a lot of good stuff on there. And so if you want an easy way to keep up with the things that are going on, so that's one place where I post a lot of updates. And so it's just a good way to keep up with it. Like what are some of the new features in Power BI and the Power Platform? What some interesting blog articles, tips and tricks, that sort of thing. So should be a lot of good stuff in there. Also, I have called out in the past this guy over here on the bottom right, this Power BI user group. So we are, of course, a Power BI user group. Microsoft had several of these. And so you can see several of these listed here. There were several Dynamics 365 user groups, there was a Prep user group, Power Automate user group. And essentially what Microsoft is doing is they're sort of rolling them all together, and they're giving it a new name. They're giving it this, Dynamics, this DAC, Dynamic Communities name, and they're sort of rolling them all under one umbrella. You can get at that by mydacfeed.com. And one neat thing about that is that there's a lot of stuff there other than just Power BI. So you've got you have a lot of stuff here that is based on Dynamics 365, and you'll see updates here in your feed that are based on Power Apps or Power Automate. So whatever you're interested in, you'll see a lot of these updates here. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more broad, this may be, again, another way to find that information. So if you go to the user group, you can still click on this link and go to the Power BI user group page, but you'll notice here there's a message here that talks about how this has been deprecated. They're going to keep the page up for the foreseeable future, but sooner or later, they'll probably take that down. All right. Sorry. All right, so let's talk about what's new. So the February update came out a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and just want to go over a few of the highlights. So the video's out there, the blog post is out there. Feel free to watch that YouTube video. They do a much better job than I can. There are some enhancements to the direct query for Power BI data sets. The enhancements are, somewhat minor, but I do want to call out, if you haven't tried out the direct query for Power BI data sets, that really is a terrific enhancement that I've been waiting for a long time. So let's say that you've got this, like certified or promoted data set, this universal data set that the organization has put out there, but it doesn't have everything that you want, and you want to add something. Maybe you don't want to go through the whole change control process because you just want to add one little thing for you, right? Well, what you can do is you now direct query that Power BI data set, which will then allow you to layer your own measures onto that data set. And so that can be a really useful thing. There's also a new search bar for features. So you've seen this in Excel and a lot of the Office products on Windows. And so let me show you what that looks like here. So there's now this search bar here, and so you can search for various different functions that might be relevant for you. You can also you can click on this little arrow here, and certain of these will have additional settings that you can go straight into those settings. So if I wasn't sure where to launch a Power Query, so we can come down here and click and we can search for for Power Query. Let's see if that will pop. And see, so it doesn't bring up Power Query because it's not calling it that, but it does bring up the transform data, and so so that would launch our Power Query editor for us. Go ahead and close that. The other thing, so let's go back here. There's also some enhancements to the model view update, which is pretty cool. So one of the things is, and so this is my version of the AdventureWorks DW data model. So this is what I've done to it. And so if we kind of zoom in here, so one of the things that they've done is that they now made it a little easier to see the relationships. So before, this one-to-many relationship, you would have had a 1 over here and the asterisk over here, and it might have been a little hard to see that relationship. And then you had the arrow calling out the directionality in the middle. So you had to look in 3 different places, each end and in the middle, to understand the nature of the relationship. And so now they put all of those in one place. So this is a one-to-many relationship that is directional, that is monodirectional. So you can also have one-to-one relationships, many-to-many relationships, and so forth. But this just makes it a little easier to figure out what kind of relationship it is and which way it's going. Some small enhancements to the small multiples. One neat thing is the color picker. Let me just show you that real quickly. So if we go to the layout view, so this is just designed to be a data model and not an actual report. And so, so if we go to the field settings and let's give it so give us some data. And let's say by count. And so if we go to the field well, and you go to data colors, for example, so we go to this color picker. So now, so this, for example, is first of all larger, which is nice. And it's spread out a bit more, so it makes it a little easier to see. But you can also go to these more colors, and so they changed the format that you can use to pick a color, and it just gives you a bit more granularity and fine tuning of the color that you pick. But you can also pick the color via hexadecimal or via RGB, which would be the three on the right. So just a small enhancement, but it's one of those small usability features that really just makes the product a lot more enjoyable to use. There's also some new filter operators like is empty and is not empty. So I'm not going to show you that one, but there's a bunch of different things in here. So what they've started doing is they've started combining the updates for the Power BI desktop and the service, data flows, and so forth, all in one place. So they actually have so much, they have two screens now. So they've got some enhancements to mobile apps and so forth. Anyway, so like I said, the video's out there, it's on the blog post. So if you go to the Power BI blog, it's the first one that comes up. And so, so normally it's the first one that comes up. They've actually pinned something else here, which I will talk about in a moment. But so if you go down, shouldn't be too far. Well, anyways, it's they normally pin that to the top, which is convenient. Oh, here it is. Okay, so it's at the top of the second page. There's your February 2021 feature summary. And so it goes into all of these in detail. And there's also a link to the YouTube video that will go through these in detail and give you some examples. So you definitely want to check that out. Moving on. So also wanted to call out a few things, a few updates that were not mentioned in that video. So one is the 2021 Gartner Business Intelligence Magic Quadrant. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we go over here, so this is the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and again, the only ones in the leader quadrant is Microsoft, Tableau, and Click, and Microsoft just keeps moving up and up and up and to the right. So if you are trying to justify Power BI in your organization, Gartner is it's one place that you can look for support, as an independent third party. And so this is a fun one to look at every year when they come out with those. Also wanted to call out this link here. Again, when you download the PowerPoint file, you can click on this link to go to this white paper. Microsoft put out a white paper called Data Insights Without Limits, Security Without Compromise. And basically that is an update on the data scalability and security features, largely the things that have come out in the last year. And so, as these updates come out, month by month by month, sometimes it's a good thing to just, every once in a while, I'll say every year or so, have a sort of rebasing of what does that feature set look like, particularly for things like data security. And because, so that way you have one place to go to see what that topography of data security looks like. because if you need to be able to present on that to management, to make to have an understanding of what that security looks like, to make sure that you're using all the features available to you. That way you have one place to go to that has collected all those updates over the last year in one convenient location. So if you are an admin, if you're a manager, or if you're focused on data security, this is something that you're definitely going to want to check out. Also, wanted to call out two additional features. So last week was Microsoft Ignite, and so we had two features that came out, two Power BI features that came out in Microsoft Ignite that I want to call out. And so one of those is Power BI Premium Gen 2 Auto Scale. It's a preview feature. Basically, what that means is, like, let's say that your organization has very spiky demand. So in other words, your demand is sort of very normal, and then maybe the first week of the month, you have very high demand for a while, and it comes back down. So Power BI Premium typically is priced per the month, right? So you can either go month to month, or you can get a yearly contract, but then you're sort of locked in for that, right? And so if your demand is mostly here, but for a week out of the month, your demand is up here, well, you've got to buy capacity that's up here that matches that. And if you have spiky needs in compute, then you're paying for a lot of compute that goes unutilized. And so the auto scale, what that allows you to do is you can add on additional nodes to your Power BI Premium capacity automatically, and you only get charged for the capacity that you used on a 24-hour basis. So so it's not so if you use it for an hour, you get charged for 24 hours. If you use it for 23 hours, you get charged for 24 hours, right? So it's based on a 24-hour billing cycle, but that's improved over a 30-day or 365-day billing cycle what it was in the past. So if you have a lot of Power BI Premium capacity, and and the capacity is sometimes very spiky, this can be a way to save quite a bit of money. Another way to save quite a bit of money, so there are a lot of features that come with Power BI Premium that you cannot do with the Power BI Pro license that have been opened up via the Power BI Premium per user. And so this is something that has been in preview since November, I think, something like that. And so what that does is it makes available to individual users something that was simply, well outside the range of what I could afford to pay for. I could afford $10 a month for a pro license, or $20 a month for a premium license. I can't really afford $5,000 a month for a premium SKU. An enterprise who has hundreds of users that are taking advantage of it maybe can, but that's not really viable for me. Now with this premium per user capacity, you can pay $20 per user per month and get access to those additional capabilities like XML endpoint and deployment pipelines and so forth. So I, for example, have an Office 365 E5 license that comes with Power BI, and so it comes with Power BI Pro. And so that's usually a $10 a month license. This is $20. So if I want to upgrade to that premium per user, it's only an additional $10. So, I get credit for what's already being paid for, essentially. Also at Ignite, Microsoft announced that they are releasing the Power FX, which is the programming language behind Power Apps. They're releasing that as open source. And so that allows developers to build on that and to build new solutions from that. So that's a really interesting thing. I'm curious to see what practitioners are going to do with that. But there's some interesting links here that sort of talk about what you can do with that, with the no-code, low-code Power FX language. Also announced at Ignite was the fact that Power Automate Desktop, which is an RPA solution, a robotic process automation solution, is now available for free for Windows 10 users. So if you have a Windows 10 machine, you can now download Power Automate Desktop for free. I'm not sure if that is for both attended and unattended workloads, but nevertheless, it's a nice way to get in there and start playing around with it and just seeing what it can do and how you can put it to good use. The last thing I'm going to call out is Microsoft put out a list of literally dozens of Power Automate learning resources. They bucketed them by beginner, intermediate, and expert. And there are YouTube videos, blog resources, training sources. I'm not sure if they are all for free, but a great many of them are completely free. So if you've been wanting to get into Power Automate, didn't know where to start, that learning resources link is going to be a great resource for you to figure out, where you can go to learn more about Power Automate. So again, download the deck to get all of those links. All right, one more thing I'm going to call out is dax.do. Dax.do. So dax.do is a new solution from the guys over at SQL BI. So that is Alberto Ferrari, who was here back in December, you'll remember, and Marco Russo. And so basically the idea was, what if I want to try out some DAX? Like I get an idea, get some wild harebrained idea on something I want to do in DAX, but I don't want to maybe I'm out of pocket. I don't want to go fire up some big model and check this out. I just want to just try out some language. So basically what they've done is they created a web interface on a model that is already out here as a pre-formulated model, and you can just throw in some DAX and try it out and see what happens. So let me just show you what this would look like. So so this is a very simple one. This says hello. It's just evaluate hello world, and so you get a 1 row, 1 column table that just says hello world, right? Okay, so that's not very useful. So let's try something else. So something else that you can do is, so this is defining a measure, right? And so the measure is in the date table. It's called my time, and it's just saying, it's just taking the time, the current time, and it's formatting it in hours and minutes, and then it says evaluate that measure, right? So it's basically going to return my time, so 11:57. So it should say 11:57. So let's see what it does. We run that, and so so that is probably in GMT. Yeah. So yeah, that would be in UTC maybe. So so it gets more and more and more complicated in terms of the things that you can do. Let me just grab one more here. So what this is doing is this is defining another measure called sales margin percent. It uses some variables here. So we're going to define a revenues variable, which is basically the sum of sales quantity and sales net price. That makes sense, right? We're also going to define the variable cost, which is the sum of sales quantities times unit cost. And then margin is basically the revenue minus the cost, right? And then the result is you want to know what that margin is as a percentage of revenue. So you divide margin by revenues, right? And then you return that result. And so then this is simply saying evaluate. And so this is basically saying I want you to create a 2-column table with brand in one column, and then the margin percentage variable in the other, and we're going to call it margin percentage. So if we run that, so what you get is exactly what you'd expect. You get brand on one side, and you get this margin percentage based on sales quantity and net price and unit cost down the side here. So anyways, so it's just a neat way to kind of play with some DAX without having to sort of fire up Power BI and loading some big model and you designing a model, that sort of thing. This is the blog post where they announce this. So you can go to SQL BI and find that there. Yeah. Anyway, so that's I always thought that was a fun little project they had. All right. So with that, we're going to turn it over to our main presenter today. So Matthew Roche is on the Power BI CAT team, and he last year did a blog series and YouTube series on building a data culture with Power BI. He was a few people that I ever heard speaking about this and blogging about it. He was very, very thorough in this, did a wonderful job with it. And so I've asked him to come speak with us today about building a data culture with Power BI. And so with that, Matthew, take it away, sir.
Alrighty, I will need you to stop sharing so that I can share my screen. And of course, as we do that, Zoom moves my buttons, but we will make this work. So I have unmuted my microphone. I have shared my desktop. I have my camera on. Can you confirm that we are good to go?
You are good to go. I can see you, I can hear you, and we see the intro slide deck.
Awesome. So let me say good morning for folks with me on the West Coast, and good afternoon for the folks on the East Coast. But hello, my name is Matthew Roche. As Michael mentioned, I am a program manager on the Power BI Customer Advisory Team, or CAT team, here at Microsoft. And today we're talking about building a data culture with Power BI. I actually want to start off sharing a little bit about my own career and experience, because it ties into why this data culture context is so important to me. So back in my pre-Microsoft days, so I'm starting from the bottom of the slide and working up here, in my pre-Microsoft days, I was a data warehousing and BI consultant, architect, mentor, trainer. I started off with SQL Server 6.0 and 6.5 back in the 90s, sort of grew as the Microsoft data platform grew in the BI space. I fell in love with SQL Server integration services, became an MVP, and in 2008, I joined Microsoft. In 2011, I joined the integration services product team, and since then, I've worked on integration services, master data services, data quality services, the first version of Power BI, and Azure Data Catalog as a PM, so sort of building and shipping these products. And for the last 3 years, so this was actually Monday of this week was my 3-year anniversary on the Power BI CAT team, I have been working with some of the biggest Power BI customers in the world, helping them be successful with the adoption and usage of Power BI. And as you can imagine, my 15 or so years as a consultant, living and working in the real world, helping actual customers build actual solutions, this was invaluable for me working not really in the real world anymore at Microsoft to build better products to make those customers' lives easier. But in the same way, now that I have seen both sides of the story, I am working in my current role to make sure that the customers who are using Power BI as their enterprise BI and analytics platform, that they have the guidance and the resources that they need, and taking what I learned from them and their struggles that I put into the blog and video series that Michael spoke kindly about at the beginning of the call. So this is basically where I'm coming from. But I also, before I jump into the data culture topic, which will be the meat of today's session, I actually want to do this lightning review of what I call a brief history of business intelligence, because this is really establishing the context of where a data culture comes in today. And I am old enough to remember when having data to work with was a novel and exciting thing that made you special. But you know, we won't go back to the 80s, but what we will do is we'll say that most data today, or much data today, is being produced by transactional systems. And there has always been a need to do reporting and analytics and visualization based on the data that is being produced and maintained in these transactional systems. And when there's just one system, there's like one OLTP database, you can do reporting on it. But very, very quickly, and this is sort of like the default, you know, since 2000 or so, for the last 20 years, the next thing has been assumed. There needs to be a way to aggregate data from all of these source systems. And everybody on the call, I assume, is familiar with a data warehouse, both as a specific technical implementation, or at least as a pattern or a category of functionality or a category of solutions. Because between the OLTP systems, those transactional systems where the data is being sourced, and the reporting and analytics and visualization downstream, most systems have some landing location, and a data warehouse as a pattern, because notice that I've got both data warehouse and data lake on the slide, and they're very different technologies with strengths and weaknesses and scale and performance that differ. But in lots of situations, the data warehouse or data lake is a place where the data will be staged. It will be standardized and cleansed and transformed and enriched to become useful for downstream purposes. And of course, to get the data into that location, you need some sort of ETL or data preparation capability. And as we scale more and more and more, there needs to be some way for that data to be presented in a format and structure that's designed for analytics, whether this is a cube or a tabular model or something similar. It doesn't really matter. For the purposes of our discussion, it doesn't matter. And all of this was cutting edge 20 years ago. A lot of the investments since then have been making things perform better, but they've also been around making it easier for more people to do the necessary work end to end. And if you look at like Power BI 3 or 4 years ago, as an example, having the ability for a business user, someone who might be familiar and comfortable in Excel, but you're not going to make them successful giving them Visual Studio, Power BI allowed those users to connect the data, to build a data model, the tabular model that is a Power BI data set, build visualizations on top of it and share it, and to do it without direct involvement from any developers or anybody in IT. This self-service revolution is really groundbreaking. This is where the challenges of a data culture start to seep in. And at least with Power BI today, Power BI as a self-service analytics platform has capabilities end-to-end, including Power Query and data flows for the ETL and the staging component. It's got the analytics model. It's got all of the visualizations and more. But the technology doesn't really matter for us today. What matters is how this affects how people work with data. But keep in mind, 10 or 20 years ago, the things that you and the users that you work with are doing every day in Power BI Desktop or the Power BI service without ever thinking about it. It used to be that you would need to work with a dedicated data or development team or reporting team in IT for even the most trivial seeming development tasks. So you may have been there, you may not, but remember it as we move forward. Specifically, as we talk more about cultures and data cultures. So that BI context really comes into play when we start thinking about what a culture is. And both of these, so I have a screenshot here. This is like the first DuckDuckGo result if you search on culture, and I'm sure your search engine of choice will have something similar. But to paraphrase this, a culture is what people in a group do. It's not what they say, it's the actual behaviors that the group exhibits. And if we think about culture like human culture, it's like the arts and beliefs and customs and institutions, like, okay, but what about a data culture? A data culture is really inside an organization, where this organization is the group, right? Inside an organization, having the things that people do, so the culture that they exhibit, revolving around the use of data to make decisions and to solve problems, and the elimination of the tribal knowledge or the dependence on a human making decisions based on their instinct or gut feel or their relationships, and instead having data that will inform more people to make better decisions more predictably and more defensively. And getting to that end state where the data that people need is available, people know what data is available and how they are supposed to use it, allowed to use it, or prohibited from using it, and having them in the practice of working with data as their default behavior. So I need to make a decision. I know where the data is and I'm going to use it. That's what we're talking about today. That's what we mean when we say that we're building a data culture. And if I had only one slide, so if you need to, if you need to run away, there's some emergency thing, this next slide is the most important one. It literally is the mic drop moment. If you don't have an executive sponsor, your efforts to build a data culture are doomed from the beginning. You cannot succeed without an executive sponsor. So mic drop. I animated that mic dropping myself in PowerPoint, and I am proud of myself. So there's the dramatic disclaimer at the beginning. Now let me walk it back a little bit and play devil's advocate with myself. So it is possible to build and grow a data culture without an executive sponsor. So I realize I'm contradicting what I just said, but it is harder than it needs to be. My personal analogy is like running a marathon in sand. And if you've ever run a marathon, and for me, marathon means 5K, I'm not a runner, but if you've ever run a marathon, you know that it is hard under the best possible circumstances. And building a data culture is difficult, as we'll see as we move on, but without an executive sponsor, all of the things that you need to do, and particularly all of the things that you need to convince other people to do, will be harder than it needs to be, because you don't have that chief data officer or that other executive, or like the director of analytics, who knows what their title is. But lacking an executive sponsor means that all of the hard things will be harder than they would otherwise be. And it's also worth mentioning that the scope of the culture, so when we talked about culture, we said it's what a group does, right? So is the group a department? Is it a division? Is it the entire enterprise organization? Well, the scope of the data culture is typically defined by the authority of the executive sponsor. So if you have buy-in from a CDO or other top-level executive, this is a really good sign. If you have buy-in from a director, someone who owns a reasonably sized but small part of the broader company, understand that the work that you're doing will succeed at that scale. But as you break through to the areas of authority that are owned by other directors or other people across the business, that you will need to fight the same battles over and over again because of the scope of that original sponsor. So think interpersonal relationships and, for goodness sake, corporate politics. So that's sort of foreshadowing the hard part as we get there. But let's start with the easy part. And the easy part in almost every BI or data centric space, the easy part is the technology. And when we think about building a data culture, the most important technical decision to make is who does what in what contexts. So what I have here, let me give a shout out to the Power BI adoption framework. I'll share links towards the end of the meeting, assuming that I remember to paste them into chat. They will be in the slide deck that we'll share as well. But this slide is stolen from the Power BI adoption framework, which is a free training resource that Microsoft makes available with files on GitHub and a video series like Talk Track on YouTube. So I've stolen this slide from there, and I've added this line that says consistent criteria and responsibilities. And basically what we're demonstrating here is that down at the bottom of the pyramid or the bottom of the triangle, there's this vast ocean of data that nobody's ever going to care about, or at least nobody's ever going to care about managing. This is the type of work that you're doing around personal reporting. So I'm building something for myself or for a very small team. Odds are there is no need to manage it. No one needs to govern it. And until we have more than a handful of people using it, nobody's really going to care about it, right? Up at the very top of the pyramid, you might have your enterprise data warehouse. You might have those systems of record that are used for regulatory reporting, right? If you've ever worked on a system that produces financial numbers that are used for reporting to the SEC, as an example, like from a US perspective, you know that if you report the wrong numbers, because of Sarbanes-Oxley, your executives might face jail time, which means that they care deeply about the accuracy of those reports in a very personal way. Those systems of record, they are subject to more care and feeding. So this might be something where in order to get access, there might be a formal training or review process. There might be a dedicated team that curates the data and the metadata in that system and keeps like daily track of who is using what and what the reporting is. And between these two extremes, there is a gradient that is typically determined by the impact of the data and the scale of its use. And from a technical perspective, your organization needs to decide who does what with what data, with what type of oversight. And I need to emphasize, there is no right or wrong location for this line, right? It's an arbitrary position. I threw it out there when I added it to the slide, but in your organization, in the scope of the data culture that you're defining, everybody needs to know where the line is and what the line means. And with these responsibilities and criteria defined and shared and understood, this is a key aspect to driving the culture. So the culture and the norms that drive behavior inside it. I've had conversations with probably 300 or 400 directors or product owners or similar senior technical and business decision makers inside large Power BI customer organizations. So I run a program called Power BI Enterprise Voice, where we engage with these senior decision makers from customers that have thousands of active Power BI users. So one of our internal metrics is called MAU, for monthly active usage or monthly active users. So if your organization has thousands of MAU, we may have spoken in the past, but in these hundreds of conversations, like literally 300 or 400 1-hour focused interview style conversations, I've seen patterns emerge. And one of the patterns is for successful organizations that implement a data culture with managed self-service business intelligence at this broad global enterprise scale, they typically have a model like the one that's shown on this slide here. This is a generic one, but if we look at the outer ring, like the bottom of the pyramid, we'll have personal BI with no oversight. So everybody has access to data, everybody gets Power BI Desktop. Power BI Desktop is free. You don't need a license. You might have a free license for consuming content that is published to a dedicated premium capacity, but for working with data, these are the tools that I give you. You know, there's no overhead, no requirement, boom, go work with data. And then at the next level, so working our way up the pyramid with smaller numbers of people or smaller number of applications, but with more impact because of the broader scope, very often we will have team level BI where everybody on the team gets a pro license. They can share with other members of the team and more broadly as necessary, but it's basically a way of growing and having more structure and shared data and analytics to drive the team. At the departmental level, there will often be at the departmental level, there will often be the introduction of a premium capacity if it's large enough. And at this point, there's additional concern about what's being developed If you publish something to shared capacity, and if you have a poorly performing data model, well, that's on Microsoft, right? It's running in that shared space that you access with a pro license, and your poorly designed model is only going to affect you. It's not going to affect the broader company. When you get onto a premium capacity, because this is a dedicated set of virtual processor cores and memory, if you have a bloated, poorly designed model, you could actually be the noisy neighbor in the capacity affecting other people from other teams. So typically, in this departmental scope, when you get into premium, there is a dedicated team responsible for making sure that before an app gets published to the premium capacity, that it is validated, like best practices analyzer run across it, that sort of thing, so that they can identify problems before they become actual problems. And at the final level, the enterprise level, this is often what we think of as like a traditional corporate or central BI. And more organizations are using Power BI for their pro BI development as well, where they will have a team of dedicated data and BI developers. They may be working in Power BI Desktop or Visual Studio or Tabular Editor or a combination of these tools, but they're going through the same rigor that they would with any BI platform, building applications that are used by hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of users with very large data volumes, and they need that rigor and that maturity to be successful. So this slide is sort of a generic view. So this is the pattern that I saw emerging. I actually want to show one specific example that implements that pattern closely. So this is terminology used by a retail customer. So I'm not going to explain any more than that, because this is just, it's how they work internally. But this is the terminology that they use for their internal implementation of managed self-service BI with Power BI, where their end users, which could be like a department manager in the store, like I run the butcher department or the floral department, and if we think about those two examples, there are very different types of products with life cycles and the type of analytics for the end-to-end supply chain. Whether it's whether you're getting bacon or roses or paper towels, right? So different rhythms of business even inside one company. But any end user in this organization, they can work with whatever data they want, and a central team is giving them curated data sets for their department. Each department is backed by some of the people further down the list. There are some departments that have both a more mature usage of data and more rigorous needs for data. So they're going to get more data pre-curated for them, and they might have the ability to share, whereas the first ones might not. And most departments have what they internally call power users, where a power user is going to have a better desktop. They will have Power BI Desktop as their tool. They will have a more direct relationship with the people in the IT team. And very often they are the champions who are providing development services for the people in their department, but they are working in the business, not working in IT. They just happen to be the more technical people or the people with a passion for solving problems with data. And this organization sees that passion and that interest and that knowledge and takes advantage of it to let them contribute in the way that they want to for the benefit of the business all around. And at the center, they have what they call hardcore IT, which I love this phrase, right? This again, they've got ticketing systems, they've got source control, they've got ALM, they've got these pro developers that would be perfectly comfortable working in Synapse or Data Factory or integration services or Visual Studio, like all of these pro tools. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they work in Power BI, but they are the traditional owners of that BI discipline inside inside the company, and they provide the resources for the users in the outer rings, with each ideally supporting the next further out. And the reason I like this particular customer is because, in addition to this categorization, which honestly it's interesting, but it's not actionable, right? There's no obvious way for someone to look at this and say, oh, well, I will go implement that in my company, because there's lots of ways to get from where you are to where you need to be. This company took it one step further, and in my mind, this is a lot of what's missing when you only look at the high-level circles or pyramid view. And this is the process of operationalization. If I'm a business user and I create something, at some point it will take on a life of its own. And either I need to change, so I need to go work in IT, which is not a bad thing, but it might not be my thing. You know, I might need to go and maintain it and keep it alive, or when I'm on vacation, it stops working. When I get promoted or leave the company, it goes away forever. The need for self-service developed applications to grow up and no longer be self-service, to be something that is owned and maintained by IT. This is another part of successful data cultures that implement managed self-service BI, because this part of it is about the management over time rather than the management at a given point in time. And in this retail customer, they have 4 phases for this operationalization. So the first one is, any owner of a self-service application can reach out and engage with IT for what they call an exploration phase. Very often at this point, they're working in Power BI Desktop or Excel. The data sources are informal, so it's like somebody's SharePoint list or the Excel that they are manually manipulating with data. So not something you could build an enterprise solution on, but they'll work with the central IT team to see, is this something that could provide broader value for a larger set of users or the organization as a whole? And if the answer to that is yes, then they will move on to the promotion phase. So for this, they will set up a gateway. They will apply theming and like standard colors and logos and other such things. They'll do some performance tuning or best practices review, but they will get it so that that data set, rather than living in somebody's desktop or being published to the service with a manual refresh, because this organization controls who can do what with gateways. They have their gateway infrastructure relatively locked down. So during promotion, they set it up. They've got it running in the service, and at either of these stages, they could say, like at the end of the exploration stage, the answer could be no. No, this is not valid. It doesn't meet our criteria for further operationalization. And at the end of the promotion phase, they could say, this is all we're going to do. It's great to have this in the service with a scheduled refresh and a gateway, but the scope of impact or the number of users doesn't meet our bar for further operationalization. But if it does, they have 2 more phases. And during the preparation phase, they will make sure that the data source that the BI application is getting its data from is reliable and trustworthy. So they might spend time, like data engineering time, getting the data from Excel into SQL Server or Azure SQL DB or something along those lines. And they will begin the process of defining formal business and IT owners. So who is the person who's responsible for the correctness and timeliness of the data? Who's responsible for maintenance and uptime and the SLA for the application? And once they have that done, they will move and hand things off formally to IT. So it runs in a prod workspace. They have support. They have an SLA. It is now owned by IT, by the hardcore IT group, and no longer by the business. And once this is done, they can look at the next application or the next or the next. And this is I see people are talking about the video freezing in chat. Should I stop it and restart it? Or should I just move on? I'll look for a thumbs up from you, Michael.
Yeah, maybe just try turning your video off and back on. If that doesn't work, then I would say not worry about it.
Awesome.
Perfect. That's terrific.
I've been gesturing wildly at the camera as I do, so hopefully it will have started again, or at least hopefully if it did freeze, I didn't have too stupid an expression on my face. Don't tell me if I did, please, because I honestly don't want to know. So there's one final view of this easy part, because remember, we're talking about the easy part at the beginning. One final view that I want to share. This is actually an internal slide that my team uses if we're doing executive briefings for Microsoft customers, because very often we are talking to their executives and talking about this process of digital transformation and maturity. And this is a view, and our NDA version has numbers instead of exclamation points. But this internal view is showing how Microsoft has traditionally had very much a cowboy culture where everybody does what they want to. You know, you're focused on results, ask forgiveness, not permission, that sort of thing. But at least in our finance group, this culture of autonomy caused problems with inconsistent reporting and wasted times. I won't read through all of the bullets, but it used to be that most meetings would start with 10 to 15 or 20 minutes of, where does this number come from? That doesn't look right to me. Are you sure this is correct? Why are your numbers different? Like all of those questions that you may still hear day to day. This used to be a common part of life at Microsoft, where you're getting together to make decisions, but there's no source of truth, right? And of course, part of this was because of the culture. And what we did was we followed an approach that we will typically describe as discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge. This is yet another view of that pyramid we looked at a couple slides ago, where there is some data that always comes from this trusted, mastered system. So there's the core finance data and analytics systems, where if you are doing financial reporting, those are the only numbers that you will use. And if you use other numbers, if they show up on a slide or in a meeting or what have you, there are consequences for that. But for the things that don't fall into that disciplined core, we want to make sure that everybody has the tools and the access and the wherewithal to go do whatever work they need to do with the other data. And this ability to have that discipline at the core and flexibility at the edge has enabled more teams at Microsoft to become more data centric, with the trustworthy data being used to make the decisions that we need for financial reporting or other high impact, high value, high risk domains, but other data being available more freely with fewer restrictions on its use. And before we get to the hard part, I have not been keeping track of chat. I want to ask Michael, are there any questions that I should address before moving on to the hard part of building a data culture? And I'm not doing this just so that I can have a sip of water.
No, not yet. There's a lot of great commentary, just funny statements. People really enjoying the presentation, but no questions yet. But if people do have questions, feel free to drop them in there, and I'll keep track of them. We can ask them toward the end.
Cool. And I will pause. There's a dedicated Q&A slide at the end, but because we're halfway through the time and at a section break, it felt like it was a good place to ask. But if the easy part is technology, the hard part, kind of like Soylent Green, is people. So any complex deployment or rollout or the like, the interpersonal, the political, the organizational challenges are always the things that will cause you to fail, much more so than the limitations of a technology or even your ability to use that technology to its fullest extent. And obviously you need skilled people on your team, but if those skilled people aren't working to solve agreed upon goals, no matter how skilled they are, their efforts will come to naught, or at least that effort will not have the impact that it otherwise could. And if we're thinking about people, there are two broad groups of people that you need to have building up the core or the foundation of your data culture. And the first is a center of excellence, or possibly network of excellence. So some of the large organizations that I work with, they basically have a center of excellence in each significant geo. Like there's one in North America, there's one in APAC, there's one in Europe, there's one, so that's one way to structure it. Or they may have it for the different primary business units. So if you're a giant multinational conglomerate, you might have a center of excellence for supply chain, or one for finance, or one for retail. And I'm making up examples, but for the purposes of today's discussion, let's just say center of excellence. And you'll assume that if you're a big enough organization, you may have more of them, and they will need to work together in a self-supporting network of sort. But basically, this center of excellence is where your expertise around the business and the data reside. You need to have the right stakeholders. So these are decision makers with budget and authority, and the people who own the systems and the processes and the tools. And they will decide what are the resources that we create, what are the investment priorities, and how do we engage with and support a broader community of practice. And the community of practice is basically everybody else. This is, if we have dozens of people in that center of excellence, we will have thousands of people potentially in the community of practice, because this is going to be the people who are reading their first Power BI report and they don't know how slicers work and they need help. Or maybe they are the experienced report authors who provide the help to the consumers, but might also be struggling with some of the DAX stuff that Michael was showing off. I'm not a DAX person, so I'm like, whoa, DAX.don't for me, thank you. But we have the people with the problems and the people with the solutions. And ideally, we will have a single location, like this central community. Maybe it's in Slack, maybe it's in Teams, maybe it's in Yammer, but there needs to be some place where they can come together. And ideally, there will be, and when I say ideally, I mean you need to do this, otherwise it's just not going to work. If you build it, they're not going to come on their own 9 times out of 10. But ideally, you will have champions. Those are the people from the business that love data and love Power BI, and they are eager to help. Like, notice them, acknowledge them, encourage them, thank them, because you need to build them up. Because as your user group supports, you're never going to get funding for another 5 people in the center of excellence just because you have more people asking questions. You need to build the community of people who are answering the questions. And those champions will also ideally be supported by moderators and stewards who are part of the center of excellence or work very, very closely with them, who are responsible for making sure that the community is behaving the way that we want, like nobody's being obnoxious or disruptive. It's the right sort of healthy and inclusive culture where everyone feels welcome, and to make sure that every question gets answered. So this is one of the real challenges about small communities when you're just getting started, is that if you have more people asking questions than there are people answering, if I come and I ask one question, I'll probably come back. But if I come and I ask 2 or 3 and I never get an answer, I am never going to go back again. And when I get the email saying, oh, come to our Power BI community, I will immediately delete it, because I know that it doesn't work. I know that it's not something that we care about, because remember, a culture is what we do. A culture is defined by the behaviors of the group. And if I'm a member of the group and I see that the behavior is ignore Matthew's questions, you might get 2 strikes, but you're probably not going to get more than 3. And this may feel very personal. I felt very emotional as I was saying that, but this type of behavior, especially at the beginning of a community of practice, you can't overstate its value. And I had a conversation with a major US healthcare company last week. And this guy is one of the senior business leaders who's responsible for well over 10,000 active Power BI users inside the organization. And basically, he told me how they did this, basically the same thing that I just told you in general terms. He told me about some specific terms, and he basically said, yeah, we're at the point now where the community is both self-supporting and self-replicating. So one team will see the success that another team is having. They don't even come to us anymore. They talk to each other. They learn and they grow and they join the community. And it's this beautiful snowball effect, this virtuous cycle that is now self-sustaining with minimal care and oversight. And this is the holy grail of a data culture, where the community maintains itself and the center of excellence is just there providing the exceptional case support and guidance. But this will never happen accidentally, where never means very, very rarely. Of course, there are always exceptions, but it's something that you need to put the time in up front. Otherwise, reaping those rewards, it's something that never actually will come around. And if you're like me, you struggle sometimes with finding the right person to talk to, the way to get their attention, the way to get their support and their funding and all of these other things. And as I'm telling this story, I'm realizing the people that come to a Power BI user group session, like you're taking your lunch hour to listen to somebody talk about a technical tool, this is probably above your pay grade. You might be a consultant where you're literally paid to come in and give advice like this. But if you are working with Power BI as your day-to-day job, odds are you are not someone that can do this on your own, which brings me back to the importance of the executive sponsor. And there are often two different ways that an executive sponsor will get engaged. So the first one is a top-down approach. And in that top-down approach, there is like a strategic directive for digital transformation where we're going to modernize our processes and our systems to be more competitive and to seize new opportunities in today's changing world. And I threw in as many buzzwords as I can, but a digital transformation is often a way that executives think about some of these big picture changes, and a data culture is sometimes a vital side effect of or product of that digital transformation when there's an executive sponsor who understands what needs to happen. It's also possible to have the bottom-up identification and recruitment of an executive sponsor, where at a small scale, there's a group or a department that has been successful with managed self-service BI, but they're limited because maybe the data they need to take the next step and have like this quantum leap forward for the data that is available for analytics and so on. It's owned by another team, and that team has control issues. And the director of one group and the director of the other group, they just don't see eye to eye. When you're at a situation like this, you need someone further up that reporting chain who will step in, evaluate the cost and the benefits from a business perspective, and make a decision. Because, and I'm gonna walk this back just a little bit. Very often when I see a spaghetti architecture, where there are systems pulling data from systems that were designed for analytics and not to be used as a data source. Like if you ever build an ETL process that gets its data from a tabular model or analytics cube, for example, this is an awful thing to do for 1,000 different reasons. But the reason why we see this again and again and again is I have permission to query the cube. I don't have permission to access the upstream data sources. So in order to solve my business problem, I need to build this data problem. I need to build a technical problem because the business solution, I asked for permission and they told me no. When you're in a situation like that, which is often when you're growing a data culture from the bottom up, this is where reaching out to and someone further up the reporting chain is going to be very valuable. And I don't know if you guys can hear it. I assume you can't on the mic. One of my kids is vacuuming right above my office ceiling. So fingers crossed the audio is okay at this point. So we talked about the pay grade things and some of the complexity. Let's sort of reground this to look at some actionable steps to take. So the first thing, the most important thing is you need one place for people to go. Have a portal. So it could be Teams, could be Slack, could be Yammer, could be SharePoint, could be whatever. Put everything there. Put the community there, put the reports there, put the discovery experience there, have the links to open a support ticket there, put everything there. And when someone comes to you and emails you and say, hey, Matthew, I've got this Power BI thing, you reply to them and you say, first of all, my name's not Matthew, because odds are, statistically speaking, it's not. But you can then also say, I'm sorry, my priorities and schedule do not allow me to respond to direct requests for support. Please go here, paste in the link, and ask the question. I may be the one to respond there, but there is a community of practice where there's lots of people that could answer your question so that you are not restricted by my schedule and my availability. And this is something that in every new role, so at Microsoft, we tend to change roles every couple of years. It's a way to increase impact and drive career growth. But every time that I'm in a new role, people are like, oh, Matthew, I've got this question. And I was like, no, I don't answer questions via email. Go to this site. And if in the new role there isn't a site yet, I am part of the motion that builds that. And because people are coming to you because they know that you're the expert. If you answer them, they will always come to you. And if you answer a question privately, the value of that answer is tiny. But if someone asks a question in a group forum and they get an answer in that group forum, this means that everyone knows that's where I go to get my questions answered by the expert. And ideally, that portal will have decent search capabilities, which means that someone who has a similar question the next week, they will be able to go and ask by searching rather than by reaching out to ask you. So direct traffic there and be consistent about it. And if anybody ever comes to you and asks for something that isn't at that portal, this is your signal that you need to add that thing to the portal. If somebody asks, if more than one person asks for it, odds are there is a larger population that needs it but doesn't know to ask. The other aspect of things is around motivation. People are complicated. I will never understand how other people's brains work. And fortunately, there are psychologists, there are experts that spend their lives understanding how other people's brains work. And the diagram on the right-hand side of the slide talking about motivation, I stole this from a Psychology Today article. I repurposed it from that. The blog post on this topic, we'll share the link at the end, actually has links to the Psychology Today article. But basically, adult humans have common motivation factors, and they come down to skill variety, which means these are the things that I do and it's not the same thing every day. So if you're like working in a factory where it's, you're repeating the same steps every couple minutes or every couple seconds, you are not going to be motivated to go above and beyond. If you have a variety of things that you're doing, you're more likely to be motivated. There is task identity, which means I can see how the work that I do contributes to the broader end-to-end process. So, think about when you're asking someone to do more data entry. It's like, oh, I need you to log your work. It's like, oh my goodness, God, I don't have time for this. But if they know that that data entry goes into a system where the reporting shows up on the dashboards that the executives look at during their, their monthly or quarterly or whatever cycles, and this is how it's being used to drive things that more people care about, that task identity is a great motivator to get people to contribute to the work that you want them to contribute to. And the final core motivator, again, for adult humans in general, is something known as task significance. And this one is a little bit more conceptual, but it's basically the work that I'm doing makes the world a better place or makes someone else's life better because I did this work. So this is what drives people to take a potentially lower salary to work for a humanitarian nonprofit, as an example. It could also be what would encourage someone to do like career mentoring or youth groups, or there's lots of examples that are out there, but at least according to the articles that I have read, this is what makes people tick. And combined with autonomy, which means people get to choose what they do and when they do it, and feedback, so they get both positive and negative feedback that helps them understand whether or not they're doing a good job. These are the factors that will encourage people to keep doing a thing that they're doing or to start doing something that they're not doing yet. And as you are building a community, you need to understand that these are the things that will get more people contributing in the ways that you want them to contribute. And the details are going to be up to you to implement, but this is what makes it work. It's not just the technology, it's the people that make it hard and which make it successful in the end. And obviously I'm on the Power BI team. I've built my career for over 25 years. I built my career on Microsoft's data platform. So I hope that you do this with Power BI. But if you are using any modern managed self-service BI tool, everything that we've talked about so far is going to apply to those tools just as strongly as it does to Power BI, because it's about people much more than it's about technology. And on that note, I want to wrap up with 3 quick quotes, or I guess 2 quotes and a rant maybe. But the first quote is from a book on object-oriented systems and design. So this is a book that I was assigned in college, and this quote has stuck with me for decades since then. And I'm going to read this verbatim. A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that works. The inverse proposition also appears to be true. A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be made to work. And if you think about this, so think about this statement of fact from someone who is apparently an expert in systems complexity. But when we apply this to building a data culture, start small, iterate, evolve, get the most important things working at the beginning, and then add the other stuff onto it. Don't try to bite everything off right from the beginning, and remain aligned to your North Star goals. Which brings me to my second quote, which is from Sun Tzu, this ancient Chinese warrior, general, and author who wrote The Art of War that apparently 21st century white guys like to use in business-related presentations. It's a thing, look it up. But this quote really resonates with me because I see this again and again and again. And you need to keep grounding yourself in, what am I trying to accomplish? Not what am I trying to do? So Sun Tzu said that strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, and tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Never act for the sake of acting. Figure out what it is that you need to accomplish. Like, what are these strategic goals that your organization has with implementing a data culture or implementing Power BI? It's like, and if you talk about data, if you talk about technical terms, you're not asking yourself the right question. So do I need to have more people working with data in their decisions? Do I need to reduce support costs? Do I need to think about the business levers that your work needs to move? Because you do need to move these business levers, or at least be part of that solution. Otherwise, you don't get the funding that you need to keep forward. So if you think about those, and you're moving really slowly, you're like, oh, I know what the goal, I know what success looks like, but I don't know how to get there, that is a better place than saying, I'm not quite sure where we need to end up, but let's write some code, or let's build a data model. Let's get that data warehouse implemented, and then we'll figure out where we go next. One of these things works, and one of these things does not work. I'll be respectful of the time. So I love to rant there, because this is something that even experienced people in mature organizations lose sight of. And when you lose sight of that strategic destination, that is where things start to fall apart. And the final note, or the final slide, is basically all of these are factors and building blocks that you can use. So I've talked about a lot of concepts, some more specific, some more general. There is no instructions for me to give to you, because you are coming, there's my 5-minute alarm going off. You're coming from a unique starting point, and the destination that you need to achieve is going to be unique to your organization as well, like getting back to those strategic goals. And the constraints that you face, like you might not have the budget, you might not be in the right team might not exist, you might not have an executive sponsor yet. There's all sorts of things that you will need to figure out as you move forward using some of the tools and practices that we talked about today. And I used to think about this as like a treasure map, where there's some destination with the X, and your starting point is going to be different, but no matter where you're coming from, you need to take the right steps to get to that, and you need to figure out the path on your own. Since I put this together last year, I have instead started to think about this more as a river, where you're on one side and you need to get to the other side, but where you are on one side could be vastly different, and the river in between could be narrow, it could be high, it could be low, it could be wide. And over time, that same river could get more or less challenging to cross, but that doesn't mean that your strategic destination is any different. And one of the sad conversations that I had, and ironically, this is another retail customer, so I'm not sure why the retail folks are top of mind for me today, but I had a conversation with someone 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they basically said, we used to have an executive sponsor, but with all of the COVID stuff, like COVID is just awful for bricks and mortar retail, or the changes, the economic changes from the pandemic, their executive sponsor left. Now they have a new executive who hasn't bought into the whole strategy, and all of the work that they and their team had been doing was now floundering, because the destination that they were moving towards was different. And they went from like playing on the easy difficulty to having the difficulty turned all the way up to, insane, brutal difficulty, without there being any technical reason for it. And having that executive sponsor, and they're working on this, they're trying to manage up to reacquire an executive sponsor, but it came back again and again, both their initial success and progress and this bad state that they're in today, because of the personal and business or organizational reasons. And I'm going to throw the slide, the final slide up here for related content. I've got links to both official documentation, that adoption framework that I mentioned, the blog and video series that Michael mentioned, and an example of a customer success story that my team generates to show an example of how an organization, in this case Nestle, has gotten up to over 45,000 monthly active users by using a lot of the techniques that we've described here today. So Michael, we've got 2 minutes for Q&A. What's at the top of the list?
Well, so I had a question for you. So how does it change one's approach to this if you're in an organization of 200 versus an organization of 20,000?
So I would say that both the problems are going to be easier to solve, which is good, but at the same time, because the problems are going to be causing less personal and financial pain today, your ability to get people to care enough to solve the problems is going to be reduced. And one of my personal philosophies from my decades working with business people is that substantive change only happens when the pain of that change is less than the pain of not changing. So if you're in an awful state because everybody has their own versions of data and you're wasting money and time every day, that's a great argument to be made to make, to put in place some of the policies and procedures that we have here. If everything is fine and nobody really cares, it's a harder sell. So I would say that the way to make progress towards this for a smaller organization is to find a nugget of pain. So what is the place where people have, duplicate data, or they're struggling to find the right data, or things along those lines, and work on a small scale, demonstrate success, and then show people what you built and how they can get similar value in their domains. And again, start on the strategic goals. So don't think, oh, I want to build a data culture. Instead, think, what is the value that my organization could get by having these things in place? And once you can articulate that value, you can then start to have conversations with decision makers on the steps to achieve that. And you can do better validation to ensure that the steps that you're probably thinking of right now actually are relevant to the organization that you're in.
Well, Matthew, that was terrific. It's 1:01 right now, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But I just wanted to say thank you again for being here. There's a really terrific presentation. We had a lot of wonderful commentary in the chat window there. Like I say, I can't wait for whatever series 2 is, so we will be eagerly awaiting that. Matthew, again, thank you very much for your time and your knowledge and insight. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks very much for having me. Everybody, if you don't mind videos of kittens, you can also look for me on Twitter. Love to hear your thoughts and your questions, which I will answer as best I can. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a great one.
Well, I'm sorry, guys, we didn't get to the other questions, but it was a great presentation with a lot of stuff. Like I was saying, ping him on Twitter, and I found him to be very responsive. So. Well, so we don't have the April meetup scheduled yet, but we'll be putting that online hopefully very shortly. So be on the lookout for that. And that is all we got today.